Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar series. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 21st edition of Crop Talk. And today we have beginning a few questions and seeing a few people talking regarding Verticillium Stripe, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to get Dave Kaminsky on. Dave's our pathologist, crop specialist, works at a Carmen, and so he's going to give us a presentation today on Verticillium Stripe, and then we're going to go to our crop scouting panel to answer some questions. Before the panel, I'll do a brief talk about where we're sitting, kind of harvest-wise, and all that kind of stuff. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Dave right now and get started with his presentation.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. I'm told that my audio is usually terrible, so this morning I'm trying to really lean into my computer for that audio, and let's hope it all works. So our canola disease survey for 2022 is pretty well wrapped up as far as fields being visited. There may be a few more from the far northwest of the province where seeding was really delayed. But we have over 100 fields now where I've got data sheets, and I've done a quick summary of those, especially looking at Verticillium Stripe, because Lionel has said there are questions about this. I've also had a call from a producer and another agronomist who were saying they had seen some high levels in a particular field, especially where the rotation was quite tight, and they're wondering about the status of this disease. First, let's talk about the diseases that we feel are important in canola. Black leg has always been there. Clubroot, as you know, we've been talking about for several years, and it's one of those insidious, slow advancing things. We have only 2 or 3 times found it within our canola disease survey. More often it's brought to our attention by agronomists or growers themselves. We did have 1 new field identified this year in that fashion, but none came up during the survey. Claritinius Stem Rot, another disease that is almost always there, especially in a wetter province than Manitoba, although we've been through a spate of dry years and it had almost fallen off the map. I expected there would be a rebound of Claritinius Stem Rot this year, and we have seen more than in the last year, but not as alarming as I thought it might be. And finally, Verticillium Stripe was first identified in Manitoba in about 2014, and at that time CFIA was considering taking action because it was considered a quarantinable disease at that time. But then a quick survey was done across Canada and the prairies, and it was found that it was already endemic, so they took it off the list. And since that time, we've been following the advance of Verticillium Stripe. Now, quickly, the symptoms of those 4 diseases. This is black leg, and these are stems cut through to show the amount of decay from the black leg pathogen. The one on top showing no infection and going down to the bottom where they're completely rotted through. And this is the 0 to 5 scale that we use for rating. We had been considering a similar scale for Verticillium because we do see symptoms within the stem, but we have not yet been able to come up with a suitable rating scale for Verticillium Stripe. There's clubroot, those awful galls or swellings of secondary roots or even the taproot, which can shut down the plants completely. These are samples from last year, 2021, and they're from the northwest part of the province. And it was where these plants were volunteers in a pea field. And so it was essentially canola on canola. Okay, there is Claritinius Stem Rot, which causes a whitening of the stem. It rots right through, gets soft very quickly. Sclerotia, resting bodies begin to form within the stem, pardon me, and shredding of the external tissue is another symptom. And finally, here is Verticillium. We've got half a dozen plants on the left cut open, which are blackleg. They have a very dark black discoloration and usually some kind of distortion of the stem. With Verticillium, those 4 plants on the right, we see a light discoloration. It's gray, and it's often a starburst pattern within the main tissues, and we don't generally see that collapse of external part of the stem. Okay, when we're surveying, we go into a field, try and get beyond the headlands, and collect 20 plants at each site and examine them for those diseases and others if they're present. At those spots, the 5 spots along the W, it's as random a selection as we can do. In this picture, this was one of the fields that I surveyed after coming back from vacation. It's from just south of Riding Mountain Park, and it actually had the highest level of sclerotinia that I saw this year. Excuse me. 25% of the plants infected, a quarter of them had sclerotinia, and the symptoms are severe enough that those plants are not going to produce anything. The grower in this case had not sprayed. He knew that there was a risk, but he decided not to use any fungicide. And perhaps that's the reason we saw more in that field than in others. So this is the classic W shape that we use in selecting our points going through the field, 25 paces or more between sites. So that field looks pretty green, but in fact it was at 30% seed color change or beyond. You can see a bit of color beginning to show in the top parts of the plants. This is from the previous year, and this is one of those crops that is shatter resistant, so left standing. The stems in this case still had some green in it, but on the top, plants are completely brown. You can see that I went beyond an area which was atypical of the field, this very dark brown area, to start surveying in an area that's more typical in the field. You can also see sprayer tracks in this field and a lot of other tracks which are not my footprints, but deer tracks going back in and out of the field. How do we decide where to emphasize our survey efforts? Well, we look at the production over the last 5 years, and that gives us an indication of how intense the rotation is. And we will look at more fields per RM when the rotation is extremely tight. And you see that quite a bit along the west side of the province, and particularly in the northwest. These are survey results from last year, 2021, but it's to show you the general trend of the diseases that we have seen. Blackleg, as I said, has always been with us. It's at a very high prevalence, that is the number of fields in which we find it. The incidence, though generally lower, it's maybe in 10% of the 100 plants that we survey, and the severity over the last several years has been fairly low, similar to that one rating, which is less than 25% of the cross-section of the stem showing discoloration. Stem rot, as I said, pretty well fell off the map last year. Aster yellows was there, and that's what the picture illustrates, but it's one of these diseases that is often rated as trace because it's visible in the field, but not showing up in the 100 samples that we take. And Verticillium last year was at 30%, very similar to the year before, 2020. And here's a 5-year trend comparison of 3 canola diseases: Claritinea, blackleg, and Verticillium. I haven't yet added the 2022 data, but I am going to show you in a moment what's happened with Verticillium. As I mentioned, Claritinea has trended downward through those dry years, and in 2021 was pretty well absent. Blackleg, on the other hand, has continued to stay the same or increase as far as prevalence. That is, how many fields are showing some symptoms. And Verticillium is a disease where we see an increasing prevalence beginning a few years ago at less than 10%, and in the last 2 years, 20 and 21, up to 30%. Now, what's the prevalence this year? Well, I have looked through 101 data sheets, and this was a quick summary focusing just on Verticillium Stripe because there's interest right now. And you can see that we're at about 50% of the fields showing some level of Verticillium. This is again prevalence, which is how many of those fields. So 6 out of the 100 showed a high level of the disease, that is more than 50% of the plants within a field showing symptoms of one sort or another. Moderate is between 10 and 50%, and so that's just over 10%. And low, that is only a few plants showing some symptoms, over 30%. But in total, we have 50% prevalence. That's an increase from the year previous. Now, what should you see in fields if you're finding Verticillium stripe? Well, the reason we call it stripe and not wilt is that in Canada, or the prairie region, so far we have only seen stripe symptoms. We have not seen generally wilting of plants. I know a couple of surveyors saw some fields that were very high infection levels, up to 90% or so, and I haven't seen plant pictures from those fields, but they say there were a lot that do maybe exhibit wilt symptoms. In any case, a couple of years ago, the Canola Council, asked us to stop using the term Verticillium wilt and use Verticillium stripe. In the European countries where they've been dealing with it longer, and often they're growing winter canola rather than spring, they do see the wilt symptom. Now, stripe, because there is often this unilateral staining of the stem. You see on a green stem it being brown on one side, and that can alternate from one side to the other as you make your way up the stem. I've already showed you what we see in cross-section of the stems when we cut them open. There's a clean plant on the right, a blackleg infected plant in the middle, very dark discoloration, and often a wedge of material or half of the stem. And finally, Verticillium, which shows like a rather faint gray starburst pattern within the core of the stem. And those are probably microsclerotia, which are survival structures of the Verticillium fungus. In this picture with the colored circles, those again are microsclerotia, and they are found peppered throughout the the pith and the vascular tissues, and just underneath the epidermis or the skin of the stems. They may be a little bit similar to Pycnidia, but Pycnidia are larger than microsclerotia. And these are the survival structures of the fungus. They can be a reason that it hangs around in the soil for a very long time, and also tight rotations lead to a quick buildup of the pathogen. The picture on the top shows shredding of the epidermis, which might fool us because that same symptom happens with sclerotinia, but we should always open stems and look for sclerotia inside, not finding them, but seeing these little tiny black dots within the cortex tells us it's Verticillium. Here are a couple of pictures courtesy of Justine Cornelson, who until last year was with the Canola Council. And on the right, we have the external symptoms on the stems of blackleg. That is a combination of Pycnidia, the asexual spore-producing structures, and Parathecia, which are sexual spore-producing structures. They can both be there, and both are larger than the microsclerotia of Verticillium. On the left, again, we see that kind of starburst pattern of gray, and above some of the microsclerotia evident through the stem and the shredding of the tissue. Now, what did we see this year? Well, of those 100 and some fields, I surveyed 10 myself, and just last week, our new agronomist, Callum, and I were up in the northwest, actually just west of Lake Manitoba, St. Rose area, and we came across one field that had approximately 40% Verticillium Stripe. So this is a picture that I took there. If you were just walking into the field and were down on your hands and knees, you might think, oh, there's a lot of sclerotinia here, those bleached white stems at this stage. But in fact, this turned out to be Verticillium. There was no sclerotinia there. And of those plants, I would say that in pulling them out and examining them, the above or the seed-bearing portion of the plant, it was generally less than 25% that looked like there was going to be no seed production. Otherwise, there was still production there. So this is a question that we all have. Just how serious is the disease? It appears late in the season. This year we had to go a little bit early in some cases to do our surveying because of the extreme variability in time of seeding and wanting to be sure we didn't miss fields before they were harvested. So the range was not always consistently 30% seed color change, but from firm green seeds in the lower pods up until the plants were relatively mature, as in this case. So I'm going to leave my word right there, and I wonder whether there will be some questions in the chat or comments from a couple of the surveyors, Earl Bargan in the Southeast and Dane Fraze, who's our oilseed specialist. Both of them had some fields with very high levels of infection within the fields and saw some plants that were infected. So I don't know if Dane is on and whether he could join us by audio to expand on that, or whether those folks that I mentioned can put something into the chat.
Hey, David, got a question for you here. Are there any specific weather conditions that seem to favor Verticillium development?
I can't say that we can put our finger on weather conditions that favor infection. As I mentioned, it has been increasing in prevalence over the last 5 years now, and we've had 4 dry years followed by what I would consider a wetter year. So as far as moisture goes, that's not a clear indicator.
Okay.
What else can I say?
One
Go
other
ahead.
question. Oh, sorry. You had something else there?
Well, it just seems that where the rotation is very tight and residues are left behind, that's where we're most likely to see it. Another anecdotal report I had was from a producer in my neighborhood, and he saw in a field that was in potato production at the dry corners where canola is often used whenever potatoes are grown, and canola is used as a rotational crop, but not irrigated in those years when they're getting a break from potatoes. So you have canola 2 years after canola at the corners of the field. That's where there was a high incidence of verticillium, and in the main part of the field, that which is under the pivot usually, but not irrigated in that year, there was far less Verticillium Stripe. So that suggests highly residue-borne transmission.
Okay. In the field that looked like Sclerotinia, so I guess this last picture you have up here, what diagnostic clued you in that it was Verticillium instead of Sclerotinia?
Well, the first thing is squeezing those stems and finding that they are still fairly firm, not easily collapsed as they would be with Sclerotinia. And then we pull or dig 20 plants and always are cutting through the stem right at the base. And that has been traditionally to look at the intensity of blackleg. But in this case, we found that every one of those plants with some symptoms up in the top part of the plant had that starburst pattern within the stem. So it's a two feature kind of characterization or identification.
Okay. When does it initially infect a plant? So is it a early or later infection on a plant?
I would say we generally do not see symptoms earlier in the year, and it's often evident late in the season or even after the crop has been taken off. And with the disease appearing apparently that late in the season, I'm quite suspicious of whether or not it has an impact on yield. This is still being determined, and they're looking at this in our neighboring provinces. Excuse me, Saskatchewan also is beginning to see a Verticillium Stripe, and we're still looking at the potential of coming up with an intensity scale for rating, but so far we're seeing these lower levels of infection evident in the cross section. But yeah, late appearing and uncertain about the impact on yield.
Okay. Is it ever too late to take samples to get analyzed for Verticillium Stripe? For example, if the crop has been sprayed or has been swathed for a few weeks?
Well, given the way it gets into the plant, I don't believe that spraying is going to affect its appearance or prevalence or incidence, pardon me, in one way or another. But no, I don't think it would be difficult to diagnose even after the season, after the crop has been taken off. There are some other things that blacken the stem. One is the formerly known as weakly virulent strain of blackleg, that's Leptosphaeria biglobosa rather than Leptosphaeria maculans. It can cause a grayish discoloration, especially down at the base of the plant. That's one thing that might be confused with Verticillium Stripe. And another is a disease called gray stem, and that we see rarely, but also something that could be confused with Verticillium Stripe. But no, it gets easier as you go later into the season. Even after harvest, we can identify the pathogen.
Okay. Any varietal differences in susceptibility?
Good question. We have not seen any strong varietal correlation, and it's not something that the breeders are trying to attack at the moment, as they are with as they continue to do with blackleg. No, I just can't answer that question. I've seen no strong varietal correlation.
Okay, and does it affect, or is there any other host crops or weeds that it affects?
The species that we're talking about for Verticillium stripe is called Verticillium longisporum, and as far as we know, it only infects canola and some of the mustard family weeds that you might see in the field. There are other Verticillium species, Verticillium dallii, and I'm having a brain cramp, but there are two in potatoes that are quite destructive in that crop, but those are not the ones we're talking about with canola, and there is not any cross infectivity between those types.
Okay, and you might have answered this one, but does rotation help the problem?
Well, it can slow the buildup of the disease, but those microsclerotia are said to have a very long life in the soil, even after the plant tissue has broken down. They're a lot smaller than the sclerotia, well, extremely smaller than the sclerotia of blackleg, for instance, but it's speculated that they can survive 10 years or more. So it's a situation maybe similar to clubroot, where we have these thick-walled resting spores that can last very long time, and it probably is necessary to lengthen rotation when you're seeing this disease in your fields.
Okay, that's all the questions that have come in so far, David, and actually it was really good. We had a lot of good questions coming in there, so thanks a lot for the presentation. You're going to hang on through the panel here yet, so if something else comes up, I will fire it at you if something else comes up, but that's everything we've got so far. So.
Okay, thanks, Lionel.
Oh wait,
sorry,
there's one that just came up here. Is it possible this goes undiagnosed in fields that also have several other diseases in them?
I would say it's possible, but not generally among the people who are surveying for the disease. Excuse me, with those who are less experienced in recognition of the disease, we go to the field for a training session and show them what to look for. I don't know, perhaps producers or agronomists out there might not recognize it, but enough people know about it that they're looking and trying to verify whether or not that is the disease when they are uncertain through our diagnostic lab or other resources.
Yeah, and I think you made a good comment when you said about the field that you and Caleb were at, that you thought it would look like, from the road it looked like sclerotinia, but then when you got in it, you could see that there was different symptoms, right? So
yes, that's right.
Yeah. Vikram actually gave some information regarding varieties. He said there are varieties which show very susceptible reactions. Example, West Star and 5440, while the new hybrids show more tolerance. So I guess there might be just some natural tolerance in some of the newer varieties, I guess.
Well, both of those varieties are no longer in production. Westar is used as the susceptible check in rating
Yeah.
for blackleg. And the other variety that he mentioned, 4505, 4555, I forget the number, but that was a situation that occurred 15 years ago or more. And in that case, excuse me, it was Fusarium wilt rather than Verticillium stripe that we were talking about. So those are examples of extreme susceptibility and differences in resistance level. But of the varieties that are out there, no, we're not seeing differences.
And I think I remember the Fusarium wilt situation. So you're right. It was one specific variety, I think, that definitely was showing less tolerance to it. Eh?
There were a few others that showed a minor infection by comparison, but the breeding companies got on that right away. That variety disappeared very quickly from the marketplace, and we have not had an issue with Fusarium wilt since then.
Okay. Well, I'm going to thank you again, David. Again, lots of good questions coming in. So thanks for taking the time to answer those as well.
Okay. Thank you, Lionel.
Okay. So I guess, Lori, if you could hand the screen back to me. And while David was doing his presentation, for some reason I was kicked off the webinar and then had to come back through. So that's why I didn't have my screen up here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go right to the crop scouting panel, as we've had a few questions come through that I want to make sure we get to today. So I'm going to start with one that came through from last week's presentation regarding aeration, and then also regarding the question that came in was adding heat to aeration to speed up dry down of the grain. And I think it's something that a lot of producers might be looking at over the next few days here, or a few weeks, as we try to get back into the fields combining. So I found this, which was some pretty good information. And if you want more information regarding adding heat or just on aeration in general, I would go to the PAMI website. They've got some really good information there. But regarding adding heat, so for every 10 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature of the air going into the bin, the relative humidity of the air is cut in half. So you could have a day like it is today, where we're probably sitting, and it's actually probably pretty close to what the chart shows in the example, but we're probably anywhere from 70% to higher relative humidity. And right now the temperature outside is probably in that 10 degrees right now. But if you divide the humidity in half, you go down to 35. So if you increase your temperature, that's how much you would be looking at getting your equilibrium moisture content, and we discussed that last week. So you definitely could do some drying by adding heat to your air that's going into the bin. So I think that the 10 degrees Celsius increase is basically cuts your air in half, or your humidity in half. So as the air is going into the bin. Again, one of the cautions, like always, is just make sure you're monitoring that heat going into the bin, because you don't want to put too high of heat going into the bin. And I put an example picture that I took a year ago or so, where somebody had just set up one of the diesel heaters and was blowing it into the bin. But you notice he did leave distance between the fan intake and the heater. And so if you could keep that temperature, the outside temperature, to the temperature of the air going into the bin around 10 degrees higher, you'd definitely be doing a good job of drying some or aerating and drying some grain that way. So check the PAMI site, good information there. And just wanted to show this slide for from last week's question. Next question, and this is going to kind of speculate in a little bit ahead, but I was talking to some producers yesterday, and I was in a field of soybeans and grabbed a few pictures, but we got talking about frost. They're calling for a chance of frost tonight, 0 to -1 in some areas. So I asked Dennis Lang if he can maybe, I guess, talk a little bit about soybeans and how they're going to be able to manage cool weather depending on the stage of growth they're in.
Thanks, Lionel. I'll first just touch on the pictures, the slides that you have here. You can see here most of these plants are into the R7 stage already. The top right picture that you see here, I do see some mature pods on there already. So, you know, at this stage of the game, even with this green leaf material on the picture on the left here, you know, a light frost of, let's say, -1, more than likely what's going to happen is you're going to just have those top leaves clip off. They'll freeze off. It takes a fair bit to freeze those pods right through. We've seen this over the years where, you know, even in our variety trials where we get a touch of frost, clips off the leaves, the pods pretty much remain intact and don't really see too much of an issue. If you want to throw it over to me, I'll pull up a couple other slides here on mine. I kind of run through a couple things here while we are on this topic here. So.
Sure. Okay, Laura, if you can hand the screen over to Dennis.
Yep, I think we should be good. I'll just expand here. And once it lets me do it. There we go. Okay, you can all see my screen right now. You see a picture of a soybean at R6 full seed.
Is
that correct, Lionel?
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So this is a slide set that I've used in the past. We always talk about frost. When we're talking about frost, what we typically want to talk about is we want to hit the R7 stage. That's probably the most critical when it comes to frost damage. The earlier stages like R6, if you were at full seed set, which means R6, but in the top 4 nodes where you have full seed, that's where the yield loss can become the greatest, right? R7 stage is what we're targeting. So at least that one brown pod anywhere on the stem, by then you're already starting to see some leaf drop already here. You might see some yellowish to greenish pods here, but typically the plant matures from the bottom up. But when we talk maturity, it's for R7, it's a brown pod anywhere on the main stem. Okay, go to the next slide here. And again, R8, that's full maturity, no frost issues whatsoever in that. But as far as yield reductions when it comes to the various stages, we're well past the R5 stage where we just have that initial seed development in the top 4 nodes. Most of the soybeans right now in Manitoba would be in that R7 stage, especially here in the valley here, Red River Valley. If these beans were, a long season variety grown in an area that maybe it shouldn't have been grown in, you might still be at the R6 stage. So if that frost was hard enough, and meaning that you're getting below that -1 for an extended period of time, you could see some potential green seed issues. Probably is the only thing I would probably say that you could see at this time. Generally, where we're past most of the soybeans are well into the R6, almost into R7. Even at early R6, you'd see 20 to 30% yield loss. But from the fields that I've seen, they're starting to do maturity ratings in Hamiota as well. So things are really moving along there at our sites there. I'm gonna flip over here. This is an example of a soybean variety that was too long for the region that it was grown in. So this one probably would have got frozen in that late R6 stage, or maybe mid R6 stage. And you can see here all the green soybeans that are in there. But that was more of a varietal thing than more than anything, because the variety was just a little too long for that growing region. I went out to my soybeans here this morning just to kind of give you an idea where these are at. So here, you know, we still see some leaf material in here. We see some yellow pods, we see some brown pods, and we look across, and most of the leaves have dropped in this situation. We zoom in a little bit more, and we can still see some green leaves in here. We see some pods that look like they're mature. They're not full brown pod yet. There's some sunburning effect in there, but when I open up one of these pods, like you see here, what you see on the inside is a nice yellow seed. So that won't be affected by the frost. If you have pods like this, now this looks very, very green, but when you look on the inside, you're starting to see that tinge of yellow start to show up, right? Even though there's some green in there. It's going to take a fair bit to freeze that pod. So I think for the most part, unless it's -4 frost for an extended period of time, I think most of the soybeans should be in pretty good shape. We've had this happen before where all the leaves drop off, like in recent years, actually. I think it was 2019, if I remember correctly, and no real issues there whatsoever. So I think for the most part, we're kind of out of the woods, unless you planted, really late, and those soybeans are still in that R5 to early R6 stage. Then there might be some issues. Other than that, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Hey, Dennis.
And that's all I have.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dennis. The producer I was talking to yesterday was calling them the bonus pods, and those are the kind of the pods that came a little bit later or didn't. A lot of times he said they never amount to anything, and he says this year they look like they're filling, and I guess that was his more concern than anything, was those bonus pods were going to be the ones that are hang around the green.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing to do is just take that seed and split it when you open it between your finger and your thumb and forefinger, and see if it's got that tinge of yellow to it inside. Then I think you're on your way. I don't think there should be any issues. Again, it's still a light frost, probably wouldn't do a whole lot to it. Over the years, we've been very fortunate that we haven't had a killing frost on early in the season. We have to go back all the way to 2004 to see that, and that was an August 20th or so frost then. Since then, the frosts we've got, the most recent one was on September the 9th, and the soybeans were fine. Soybeans out west that had gotten that -9, or not -9, but on the -3, -4 frost for an extended period of time, there was really no issues with the soybeans. They were far enough along, and even with these green ones, at this point, I wouldn't really worry about it too much if you've already got leaf drop already happening. So I think you're on your way.
Okay, Dennis, there was a comment here. One of your slides showed the impact of frost at various growth stages. Could you just show it one more time?
Yep. And let's just go back to here. Go back up to here again. Yep. Let's go back here. There we go. Just scroll through here. It's almost there. There we go. There you go. So frost at that R6 stage is that 20 to 30% yield loss. Now, that would probably be early R6 stage, so which means that you're probably looking at, you're probably looking at where at R6, basically what you're looking at is full seed anywhere in the top 4 nodes. So that means there's still a significant amount of green seed on that plant yet, and I'm assuming we're going to be past most of that in most fields. So.
Okay, I think that was the slide that was asked for. So, okay, just wait one second, Dennis.
Yeah, that's well.
Yeah, that's good. That was the slide we were looking for. Good, thank you. Okay, so
and like I said, I was going to say, once you hit the R7 stage, that's what we always talk about. Having mature pods in the plant, because then their yield loss is significantly drops. So that's where and this information comes from some research from down in the US, but this is kind of what we use as our benchmark. So
great, thanks, Dennis. And Lori, if you could hand the screen. Okay, next question is going to go to Ann Kirk. Recent rains and the duration of the event, how is that going to affect falling numbers? And is there anything that can be done to maybe, reduce the problem with falling numbers? There you go.
We're not hearing you, Anne. I can see you've unmuted yourself, but we're not hearing you. Okay.
Can
Okay,
you
we
hear me
got you
now?
now. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so for falling numbers, the real issue with falling numbers is, or the reason why they're a concern is because the seed can degrade quickly once the seed breaks dormancy and begins to sprout in the head. So that's the issue that farmers are concerned with right now. So when that sprouting occurs, the alpha amylase enzyme begins to break down starch into simple sugars. So this is the real concern, in that the impact, the quality of bread can be, bread quality won't be as good. So the bakers need that enzyme in their flour to break down the starch, in the baking process. If it starts, when it's in the seed head still, then you don't have, then there's none of that left for when the bakers are wanting to break down starch. So the falling number test is used to evaluate the amount of sprout damage in wheat. So you're really looking for, there isn't like a standard. It would really just depend on what the industry looks for, but usually we're looking for a falling number of 300 seconds or higher. And what we're actually measuring is the time in seconds for a stir to fall through a slurry of ground wheat. So the faster the plunger falls, the more alpha amylase is present. So the faster it falls, the lower the number, so the number of seconds that it takes to go through. So a higher falling number means less sprout damage. So there isn't anything that farmers can do about this. The biggest risk is having your grain in the field longer than, like, once it's mature. So, once it's there and if sprouting happens, there's nothing that you can do after the fact. But so yeah, there's kind of no management decisions that could be made at this point.
Okay, good. Thanks, Ann. I know there was some producers, I know yesterday I was out in the field in some wheat fields, and you really didn't notice a big change in color of the wheat yet, but I would imagine that if we get more days like today, it's going to be become an issue. And the question that has come in, Ann, is there varietal information on falling numbers?
Yeah, so falling numbers is tested when a variety is registered. The falling number is one of the quality parameters that's looked at. So there is information out there, but you'd have to kind of look into the registration documents. We don't publish that in Seed Manitoba. But in terms of variety registration, falling numbers is one of the quality characteristics that are looked at. So if a wheat variety just naturally has low falling numbers, then that would be flagged, and it likely may not move forward for registration. So for the CWRS varieties, where they're looking at bread baking as an end use, I'm not sure what the cutoff is, but the varieties that are registered would have fairly good falling numbers. So like the Canadian Grain Commission, it's not one of their standard quality measurements, but a number 1 CWRS wheat normally has a falling number greater than 350 seconds. So it's about 350 to 500 seconds is what most wheat varieties would just naturally have. And there's no firm number, but most industry is looking for falling numbers of 300 seconds or higher. So those wheat varieties that are registered would fit within the the industry standards.
Okay, good. Thanks, Ann. Next question is going to go to Kim. We've been getting a few more calls and a lot more field visits by Kim regarding water hemp. I've got a few slides for you, Kim. So this is the first instance. If you could, I guess, take it away and just tell me when you want me to change slides for you.
Okay, thanks very much, Lionel. And Lionel, unfortunately, I think has firsthand experience with this weed now. So because he picked up a sample for me up there in the Ellis Archie district. So unfortunately, this weed is spreading, and we just need everybody to take a really good look at it. This is water hemp. This is the first confirmed water hemp sample I had in this year. That plant was found in a soybean field that had 2 shots of glyphosate, a liter each time. It did nothing to it, didn't slow it down at all. At the time I got this plant, it was about 8 feet tall. That's our 6-foot long tables in our boardroom in Carmen. And so Lionel, if you can advance to the next page or next slide, please. That's just my crop protection guide down there in the corner, just for reference size. I think we all know what the guide looks for. Oh, Lionel, can you back up just one page, one picture, or did you see the heads I wanted to notice, or I wanted to show you guys? Maybe we'll come to it. The pictures might be out of order. I apologize for that. But anyways, the heads on the water hemp, it does look like a pigweed, but it looks like a long, tall, skinny pigweed with kind of skinny, droopy heads. They're kind of long and snaky. They're not thick and bunchy the way a normal red root pigweed is. And normally too, the water hemp is a dioecious plant, so the male plants are quite soft. The inflorescence at the top is very soft feeling, whereas the female plants are very spiky, so they feel more the way a red root pigweed plant does. If you grab the seed heads on a red root pigweed this time of year, they're really spiky and they'll poke your hands. Anyway, so these next couple of pictures are probably not a true water hemp, but we're starting to find some hybrids in Manitoba here. Those don't look as big. Those are maybe only they're about as tall as me. I'm 5'6". So those actually were on the edge of a soybean field. They probably did get sprayed with glyphosate, depends how far over you hang the boom, but this was literally right on the edge of the field and it's growing there. So this, we feel these are also glyphosate resistant. We are finding some plants that are maybe not 100% water hemp DNA, but they are still glyphosate resistant. So I guess at that point, it doesn't really matter what we call it. It's glyphosate resistant and it's a really big pigweed. So if you can go to the next slides, Lionel. So these are just things to watch for when you're driving past a field and you see anything that big sticking up out of a plant, out of a crop. We're seeing it in the dry beans, or seeing it in the soybeans too, as the soybeans are losing their leaves and they're becoming a lot less to look at in a soybean. These weeds are really standing out. Still seeing these showing up in canola, especially on the headlands in some places, and we're seeing these big funny pigweeds show up. That there where my hand is, that's the size of the stem on one of those plants that I showed you in the previous picture. They're just monstrous. You need to dig them out. If you pull that out of the ground, it'll break off, and those will regrow and probably set a few seeds before freeze up this year. I'm not kidding on that. I've seen that where they can regrow and set seed in under 2 weeks, even in not ideal conditions. So because it's a pigweed and pigweeds be pigweeds. Anyways, so those are large plants. Again, those ones weren't super tall, probably only 5.5 to 6 feet tall, but again, very big. And if you can go to the next slide, Lionel, just to show what kind of we're seeing in the fields right now, especially we're starting to see these patches of these water hemps showing up, and you can see there's something mechanical reason why this is here. This pigweed in this one field, or sorry, this water hemp in this one field, it's very linear, and there's a long strip of it. So I'm not sure what's gone on. We're still working with the farmer to figure out why that's there. But there probably has been plants. When I see something like this, those plants have been there for more than 1 year, and they're starting to get spread around through that field through mechanical means. And lots of times it's just through the end of a combine. We'll see these strips of water hemp start to show up in the fields before they get moved all over the place with tillage. So and the next couple of slides too are just showing, like, this is me standing on the road. So I can see, that's several hundred feet into the field, and I can see that these weeds are a good 2 to 3 feet above the soybean. So if you want to go to the next couple slides, Lionel, and just page through them, and I'll just keep talking. So if you see these weeds, please let me know, let somebody know. We have to know what these are. We really need to know the species if we can, but we also need to send them for resistance testing, because we need to know what we're up against. The majority of the resistance testing that's been done in the province has shown us that the populations found so far are group 9 resistant. They're all group 9 resistant. So every water hemp we found in the province is group 9 resistant. And most of them, like 95% or more, are also group 2 resistant. We did have just one population last year that was actually a group 9 and a group 14 resistant. So that was different. We weren't expecting that. We normally see that group 9 and that group 2 combination together. So again, we're assuming whatever we're seeing is for sure glyphosate resistance and probably group 2 resistant as well. So again, this is why we are seeing it in some of our Clearfield canola crops. Aries is a great chemical, does a really good job on weed control when it's, you know, when it's used at the right stages and that, but it's a group 2 and it can't do anything against a group 2 pigweed, no matter what pigweed it is. Group 2 resistant pigweed, sorry. No matter what kind of a pigweed it is, it's not going to work. So we have seen it again, see these things start to show up in some of our canola fields as well, which that's new for this year. So please, I know we've made really good harvest progress, but for the crops that are still out there, again, the dry beans, the soybeans, even the canola that's still out there, if you're seeing some of these big weeds, then yeah, I think that you need to go investigate. We're finding it in wheat crops too, and I think if you actually look back at Anne's picture there where she was talking about falling numbers, it looks like there's some pig weeds in that wheat field as well. We've seen a little bit in wheat, but usually it's just on the very edges of the field, maybe where the crop's a bit thinner, or I'm not sure, like maybe a bit less crop competition because of, you know, a wet spring and some compaction on those headlands. So we have seen a little bit of it in wheat this year, but it's just really just random plants here and there. So anyways, we're seeing a lot more. It's just showing up in the areas that we've seen it before, but there's a bunch of new RMs that it showed up in as well this year. So it seems to be moving all over the province. So just everybody needs to keep an eye on it, not just us here in southern Manitoba.
Okay,
so that's
great,
probably
Kim.
all I had.
Sorry, great, Kim. That was good information. I didn't put up all your pictures you sent me.
Okay.
There was quite
Okay.
a few, so I put up a few.
Okay.
So, but yeah, no, the pictures were definitely the weeds I found anyways. And myself, like you, I'm not very tall, but it was still taller than me. So they definitely are big and they're definitely showing up. So thanks, Kim, for that answer. Next question is going to go out to Darren Bond and John Hurd. Getting a lot of calls about what's the value of straw and what guys should be putting on for a value of straw. So Darren's going to look on the economic side, and John, you want to key in on some of the nutrient values, that would be great.
Thanks, Lionel. Would I be able to share my screen? We have our
Yeah.
straw value calculator.
Yeah, Laurie, can you show Darren's screen? Thanks.
All right, so you should see or eventually see the straw cost calculator.
You bet.
Okay, so this is important this year with the run-up that we've had in the fertilizer values over the last little bit here. So this calculator, just in its most basic terms, determines how much of each macronutrient is in the straw and then assigns a value to it. People can change the values of the nutrients. They can assign a custom baling rate and change the bale weight so we can determine per bale values, and then even have a markup if the margin's important and if it's going to be for a custom setup. The one nutrient I'm going to draw attention to is potash. Just from the recent, well, somewhat recent run up 18 months ago, we've seen the value of potash roughly double or even a little bit more than double. So this potash value really becomes important into these straw values that we're seeing. So we scroll down the page here a little bit. I'll focus mainly on cereal straw, but we do have cereal straw, corn stover, peach straw. Those are some of the main ones that we see. We also have canola and soybean straw as well. But as we can see here in the cereal straw, the potash makes up about half the value of the nutrient value in the straw. And there's some agronomic caveats I'm sure John's going to touch on shortly, but we can see here that using these numbers and a 900-pound bale, we can see a straw value of about just over $18 per bale. And if we throw in the baling cost, we're up to in that $30 range. And if we put in some markup, almost $35. So this is a cost base. Obviously, it's not based on the market value of straw. It's the market value of fertilizer, and then how much fertilizer is in there. Of course, there's a lot of variability within this, but this does give some starting points for those discussions. And we can see if we jump over to the corn stover, I know in the Interlake last year, there was with the drought, everything was being baled up, and So there are a lot of producers really like to use corn stover, and we can see that there is some pretty significant value, again, mainly from the potash in that corn stover as well, and bales with in that high 30s to low 40s value. So this is pretty neat. This calculator can be used on iPads, can be used on your phones. Pretty easy to use. There are some caveats here, and I'm going to hand it off to John here shortly, just about the removal of potash on clay soils and comparing that to sandier soils, which often have some shortages of potash, where straw removal can be much more impactful on those sandy soils. So John, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thanks, Darren. I appreciate that we put such a calculator together, because I think that it kind of helps in the negotiation, and people really shouldn't be giving straw away. I always used to say straw is a nuisance until your neighbor asks for it for free, and then it has some value. So yes, I just wanted to reiterate what you finished with there in the footnote below, is that farmers who are on heavy clay soils may well have the luxury of parting with that straw without worrying about the replacement value of potassium, just because natural levels are high. But on sandy soils, you really need to consider the replacement value, because if you lose that straw, you really should be replacing those amounts with purchased potash, or even better, getting manure back from the neighbor that's getting your straw. So again, sandy soils are the ones notoriously low to begin with in potassium, and ones where we will need to be replacing it. One of the notes on your average levels there, those are good averages, but man, a quarter century ago, we did some field testing of straw bales and found a wide range around there, particularly with potassium. And the trick is, potassium is soluble in the straw at this stage. So anyone getting rains on your straw, your potassium's leaking out. And so if your straw is harvested after these rains, you're not losing as much potassium. But if your straw gets baled up fresh without rain, then you may well be exporting more potassium than this. So again, just an aside, potassium, it's not in the rebar of the straw, it's in the soluble portion. Leave it at that. If you have some questions, I think this is a great little tool for growers to consider.
Okay, John, does straw removal also affect chloride?
Oh boy, probably not very much. Chloride also is very soluble in the plant. And I think that through the maturing process, it probably also is lost or washed out. I don't know that we've ever really had chloride measured when we do straw measurements, and even now we're doing some nutrient removal calculations across the prairies, and I don't think chloride is typically measured. I would need to check on that, but yeah, I don't think there's a lot of chloride removal.
Okay, good. Thanks, John, and thanks, Darren. That was good information as we get into, you know, seeing what we're going to do with some of this straw that's going to be left this fall. Kim, if you're still on, I think you are. A question has come in for you. Are you seeing any Group 2 resistant shepherd purse?
No, not so far. Now, having said that, we are actually just doing part of the weed survey that we did this summer. The big part was the abundance survey. That's over 700 fields that we did. We do come back and do about a quarter of those fields where we've been in gathering weed seeds. So we've been gathering those seeds. I myself didn't gather any, but I think probably some of, like, none of the fields I had shepherd's purse in, so I wouldn't know. But we do gather those weed seeds, and they are checked for resistance as kind of phase 2 of the survey. So to my knowledge, we haven't seen that yet. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that we haven't found it and it hasn't been tested. If you have anything that you suspect is herbicide resistant, what you need to do is gather the seeds. And then there are several labs available that will actually do resistance testing. Basically, they will grow out the plants and spray them and see what kills them and what doesn't. So if anybody has any questions on that, give me a call. But we do have several labs available, and especially, you know, now we have a lot of people will do that with their wild oats for their wild oat testing, but you know, it can be done for other weeds as well. So that is certainly something, if you suspect it, you should try to get that checked. And this is the time to be gathering those seeds. They should be mature, and you know, we need to gather enough of them, but I can help you with that if you need. So just give me a call.
Great, thanks, Kim. Lori, if you could hand the screen back to me. And John, how much rain is required to wash out potash? Do we need like an inch, a half inch? What is your thoughts there?
You're still there, John, but you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, maybe a good thing I was muted, because I don't know the answer, but let's say an inch. You know, it's something that we often observe when people leave canola straw out for an extended period of time. Sometimes on sandy soils, the next year we see really good crops below the swath where that potash is washed out, and poor other areas. So don't have a value on that. It doesn't mean very much unless you're going to go to all the effort to take a nutrient test on your straw. But I would just say it's of largest concern, this straw removal on sandier soils where we need it for, we really like to retain straw not only for its nutrient value, but also to offer, erosion control and soil structural benefits. So we tend to say, harvest straw may be a good thing to do on the clays, quite tolerable, more risky on the sandy soils.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Being that we're a little past time here, I'm just going to go through a few of the slides regarding our hay listing service. If you're looking for or wanting to sell hay or straw, you could put it on there. Remember the crop residue burning, that is going now, so make sure that you are in an area that can burn before you start any fires. Getting closer to the dates for a clean farm to be picking up old pesticide and old livestock medications and chemicals. So check the dates and see where you can go drop that off if you have stuff to get rid of. The crop extension specialists in the province, I'd like to introduce Kalen Morrison. He's in Carmen. I don't have this cell phone number yet, but that's the phone number for the Carmen office. So if you need somebody to talk to somebody regarding your cropping issues, Kalen is now in the Carmen area. So welcome, Kalen. Our livestock extension specialists in the province, we're into that season where we're going to need a lot of ration balancing as a lot of the crop has come off. So give these people a call and they'll definitely work through any questions you may have. Our ag service centers, their locations and phone numbers if you have questions as we go get I get harvest closer to being done. And join us next week, September the 28th, as we have our next edition of Crop Talk. Hopefully we have some better weather, so we get everybody back out into the field and get some harvesting done. From the crop report yesterday, I think we're still about 40 to 50% complete of the province. So there's still a lot of crop to be taken off. Hopefully the wind stays down. Like I mentioned at the start, we had some guys swathing canola and we started to see some swaths rolling yesterday. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd like to thank all the presenters, and thanks everybody for all the questions today. There was a lot of really good questions, and thanks for the panel for helping answer all those questions. See you next week.